Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sophie Phillips. I'm the CEO of Text Protects, and welcome to the Text Protects Connects Zoom Lunch and Learn series. And this is episode number 10, Building Resiliency in Our Classroom and Families, sponsored by Cigna. And this is the second of a two-part series with Cigna focused on trauma and resiliency. And so for those of you who may not be familiar with Text Protects, our mission is to protect Texas children from the trauma of abuse and neglect, and really empower families to thrive. And so before we get started today, we want to know who is in the audience and who is with us. And so we are going to launch a poll and ask you just a few questions. And so you'll see that appear on your screen, and we will close that in a few moments once everybody has a chance to enter your responses. And so as you guys fill out the poll, I just wanted to discuss the format for today. And so we will have a presentation of about 20 and 25 minutes, followed by an interactive discussion, and then open it up for question and answer. And so if you have any questions throughout the presentation, please feel free to type those into the Q&A box. Please do not put those into the chat box, but the Q&A box would be great. And we will open it up and address those the last 15 minutes or so of the event today. And so today we are going to dig deeper and look at the 2020 Cigna Resilience Index study that demonstrated that while children really start out as highly resilient, they start to experience a sharp decline through their early preteen years, and that continues to dip into young adulthood. And so to better understand this trend and to help build resilience in the face of today's challenges, we have our expert speaker today, Mr. Tom Heritage, who is a licensed professional counselor and is the Cigna Healthcare Behavioral Health Clinical Account Manager. And Tom, we are really thrilled to have you with us today and thankful for your expertise and willing to share it with us. And I know this is a really interesting topic to me personally, to the organization, and those members and advocacy community of ours. So thank you for your time today. And with that, I think we are going to get ready to close the poll here in just another moment or two. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to you, Tom.
All right, well, thank you. And thanks everybody for joining today. I'm very happy to be here talking about this very important topic of resiliency, both in the families and in the classroom. And I think we can all agree that all of us have a need to take a look at resiliency and pay attention to our own resiliency during these difficult times, unprecedented times of stress. And we all know that with the ongoing stress and the duration of stressors, that our own resiliency gets impacted. And that's equally true for the children in our society as well. I had prepared to tell a little story at the beginning here, but this morning I had a conversation with one of my colleagues here at Cigna that's actually leading one of our behavioral teams, and she was reflecting on just how heart-wrenching it is to see the number of cases that we're seeing in our caseloads of children who are struggling with suicide, secondary to the multiple stressors of homeschooling, remote schooling, the new school environment, and all of the other stressors that have been associated with COVID and the other events of this year with the social unrest and the election and just everything that everybody's dealing with. And so absolutely a timely discussion for us to look at how do we pay attention to resiliency? How do we understand resiliency for what it is and how it develops, and how can we look at the classroom in particular and the family setting and identify ways to bolster and support and foster increased resiliency. So as we get started, let's go to the next slide. We mentioned the study that Cigna recently completed regarding resiliency in our culture. And one of the key findings was that resilience is at risk for 3 in 5 Americans. So again, at risk, meaning it's being challenged. We are definitely being stressed and fatigued as we go through life. And it's an important issue for all of us to pay attention to. And when we look at it, kind of what's our definition of resilience? A very simple definition is our ability to quickly recover from challenges. But I think that's an incomplete understanding of resilience, because resilience also relates to my ability to be successful within the context of challenges. So it's not only recovering afterwards, but what are the skills, what are the traits, and the characteristics that I draw upon to be successful in spite of my circumstances or within the context of challenges. I think that's an important piece for us to be looking at as we go through our conversation today. Many people think of resiliency kind of as the grit that an individual has, or they call it perseverance, determination, or the ability to make lemonade when life gives you lemons. So all of those are just kind of constructs that we can think about and keep in mind as we go through. So let's go to the next slide. So we mentioned that in the Cigna study, one of the things that was highlighted was kind of the life cycle of resiliency in children, young adults. And in particular, what stood out to us is that children between the ages of 11 and 20 and up through the age of 23, we see this sharp decline in resiliency. And of course, that raises the question: well, what might be driving that? What's going on? And arguably, we should look at, okay, what's happening developmentally during those times? And again, that ages from 11 to 23, we see that individuation, that moving away from being identified entirely by our family or those external things, and kind of developing what's my internal identity. How do I navigate the world with my own thoughts, my own skills? And so some of this is reflective of just the newness of those skills and the experimentation and learning success in addressing challenges. But I think it also has to do with there's not a real solid development of a sense of self. Kind of, it's still very pliable, kind of that sense of who am I, where do I fit in the world, what's my personal philosophy, what do I believe about a variety of things. And so not having that real solid sense of self that I'm operating out of consistently also impacts my ability to then choose strategies to successfully navigate when challenges come, or to make sense of what's happening when challenges or adversity hits in our lives. So there's a lot of things in play. There's a lot of things to consider here, but we want to really highlight. This calls out how significant the adults in the lives of young people are during this time. So as educators in classrooms, as parents, we need to understand that this is a very critical time for our youth, and we have an opportunity to create a positive impact and to help foster increased resiliency in these age groups. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so as we're talking about that development of self, that identity, we need to pay attention to the power of perspective. So what is perspective? So in general, perspective is the lens through which I view my world and myself. So what makes up that sense of identity is both what's going on, what do I see as my social reality? So what's my culture? What are the resources available to me? What is my station in life? What's the state of my family? Just all the variety of things that are external to myself that have an impact on who I am and what I view as available to me. And then there are those personal narratives, those internal thoughts and messages that look at who am I, how do I make sense of the world, What's my role in what's happening to me? And so what we find is that right there at that intersection between social realities and personal narratives is where identity exists. And I think it's important to call out that because we're talking about perspective, perspective shows me what I can see. It doesn't show me everything that's possible. And that's an important piece to call out because, again, depending on kind of where I find myself in society, the parenting that I'm receiving, the examples that I'm seeing, and the messages that I have internal to myself, it significantly impacts what I view and what I see as possible and available. But it's important for us to know that perspective can change. We can expand our perspectives, or we can narrow our perspectives. And it's through that expansion of perspectives that many times we find new resources and the new ability to cope, or different strategies to deal with the demands of life. And not being aware of perspective can many times leave us feeling very limited, like we are maybe trapped, or that I have very limited options as to how I can proceed. And so again, one of the strategies that we're going to talk about is how do we expand perspective? How do we expand the awareness of what is out there? Also, what is increasing awareness of myself? And challenging personal narratives is going to be part of that as well. The definitions that I have attached to what and why is happening to me many times are not accurate or not reflective of the entire picture. So let's move to the next slide. Okay. So this naturally leads us into, as we're developing that identity, what's the role of the family? And so let's advance some bullet points. I'll start popping up. Here we go. So the role of the family, the strategies for dealing with difficulties are learned. So first and foremost, our family is the first role model that we have. And like I said, on that chart up until age 10, an individual, a child, will not question what the reality that is projected onto them from their family is. There's only one option, and that is what they experience. And so, though, what is happening in the family, the strategies that the family employs, will be the strategies that our first role model will be the first example that they see. And we see in that second bullet point, children most often apply the strategies they see modeled by parents or significant adults. So when challenges arise, how they approach it is going to largely be based on the example in front of them or that they've been exposed to. And then our beliefs about ourselves, the world, and others contribute to the strategies we choose. So what my family, what my parents, what the significant adults in my life teach around beliefs, how they define the world, how they define what's available, what's not available. Again, those are the things that determine what strategies do I see as real possibilities to apply for myself. It's not realistic for us to expect that a child not exposed to a healthy role model or healthy strategies to magically apply healthy strategies when conflict or adversity arises in their life. And you see down there on the bottom, those arrows kind of demonstrating, what are some of the critical continuums that we all fall upon, if a parent's belief that the world is unsafe, how they approach their child and what they teach the child, how they demonstrate to the child how they should interact with the world, will be influenced by where they fall on that continuum versus if they feel like the world is safe. So, you know, a very simple example that's maybe relevant to our society today is the view of the police. If your family has grown up in a situation where your experience with the police has been that they are not trustworthy, it's very unlikely then for you to grow up with a feeling that the police are a resource and an advocate. On the other hand, if you grew up in a family in a situation that promoted that the police were a trustworthy resource, it's hard to understand why somebody would think that calling the police isn't a positive thing if they need help or if they have a need. So again, you can see just in that simple example that where we fall, where parents and significant adults in the life of a child fall on these continuums, and these are just two examples. There are multiple other continuums that we have to look at. But safety and trustworthiness are two significant areas that we should pay attention to. And it should allow us to then say, you know what then do I expect and where do we begin to intervene based on where people are falling on this continuum. So let's go to the next slide. So because we all fall somewhere on those continuums, and none of us are dealing with perfect perspective. We all have blind spots. We all have limitations. We have to be purposeful when we're approaching the idea of resiliency. And one of the things I need to call out here is that resiliency are these skills that we develop through exposure to challenges and to adversity. Simply being protected from adversity or challenges does not create resiliency in a child or an individual. In fact, when we look at the studies, particularly around the challenges of resiliency in children, it's many times those helicopter parents, those overprotective parents who make every effort in the world not to expose their child to stress, anxiety, challenges, adversity, that are raising the children with the least amount of resiliency. They become dependent on an external environment that protects them and buffers them from these uncomfortable situations, and they don't develop their own skill set. They don't develop their own capacity to navigate through those situations. So we're not looking for, a parental strategy. How do I create Shangri-La for my child? It's how do I that challenges and adversity are a normal part of life. How do I normalize that? How do I make that thing? And again, I have to be willing to acknowledge that for myself and not hide when I'm dealing with a challenge. Again, understanding the power of my role model so that we have this openness that allows the child to understand what strategies am I applying? How am I approaching this situation? How do I define what it means that I'm going through an adversity? And so you'll see some of those characteristics there. What are the things that we need to pay attention to when we are being purposeful about nurturing resiliency? And you'll see things like commitment and connectedness. A family that demonstrates that there are shared goals and that the needs of the family or the individuals within the family supersede just the needs of any one individual, and foster that sense of the family works to meet the needs of the whole not any one individual. That fosters that commitment, connectedness, and we're going to talk about connectedness a little later on, but feeling like a part of, feeling that this isn't about only my similarities that makes me connected, but being accepted for my unique characteristics as well. Just calling out a couple of others, because I could spend all day on this slide, but spirituality. This is an important aspect of resilience, as it many times creates perspective that's larger than my experience. How do I put this into a context beyond just my experience and the limitations of my resources today? And many times that helps us to reframe what we're going through, and again, to apply a strategy that looks further forward than one if I was simply looking at, I have to only deal with this based on what I'm seeing in front of me. I also want to call out individual assets, an environment that acknowledges and encourages the development of individual assets, skills, unique characteristics, is very protective for children. And what I mean by that, actually studies that look at children who've been exposed to trauma or abuse, many times they find psychological protection through engaging in either areas that particular skills sets that they have, different assets that they have personally, and that can distract them, that can actually give them kind of a protective barrier from just the events of the trauma or the adversity that they've been dealing with. And many times this is where they connect to a significant adult outside of the family. Somebody takes interest and values their individual assets, and that helps them develop perseverance and be able to get through situations that maybe otherwise they don't have any control over. And so that's an important one for us to call out. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right. So for parents, particularly, I just wanted to include this slide. This is the approach that we have put together in response to our findings in our own resiliency study. It's just a simple strategy that people can apply. And you see the steps there, grounding yourself in the situation. Okay, what is the reality of what's happening? Who am I in the situation? What are the resources available to me in this situation? What am I telling myself about it? So just that self-awareness. Understanding what I can control. Again, this is shifting to that internal locus of control versus the external locus of control. My circumstances don't determine my success. The choices I make within myself, the decisions and behaviors I choose, they have the power to lead me to more success within the situation I'm in. Organize the resources that I need. So again, whether those are internal or external resources, tapping into what do I have available to me now. I may not be able to overcome the entirety of the circumstances that I'm in, but I can take positive steps. I can utilize resources that are available to position me to later on. Each of these small steps that I take collectively may actually create the path out of the circumstance. But if they don't, I will still be better positioned within that circumstance to be successful. And then work with your community support. Identifying those resources outside of myself and the people outside of myself that are also invested in supporting and promoting resiliency, my success, my well-being, and tapping into that again, that sense of community and belonging, and knowing that I'm not in this alone. I think we've all learned that this year, that we cannot do everything alone. We all need support. We all need resources. And so tapping in into those resources is a very important skill. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll make a transition here to talking more specifically about the classroom. Oh, I have one more parent slide. I'm sorry. So what can we do as parents? Okay. So again, this is a lot about my own self-awareness and my own intentionality when it comes to resiliency and understanding my role as a role model, as an example, that I'm setting a tone for the next generation. So how do I do that? I actively manage my own emotions and stress. I prioritize compassion over criticism. So again, it's really easy for us to be critical, to understand what was done wrong or how they're not working well. But prioritizing that compassion over the easy step of identifying the error. Use good enough as a standard. And again, we're going to talk about kind of a growth model of interacting when we talk about children, but good enough. Perfection is not a realistic standard, and making progress over perfection is an important characteristic that parents can embrace. And again, it increases the positive feedback that we share with our children versus just that ongoing negative or highlighting of the errors or the misses in life. Find your way to kindness and patience. Okay? So again, really being intentional about how do I incorporate kindness and patience into my interactions with my child, particularly when they're dealing with struggles, when they're approaching something and not doing well. That is when it's most important that we incorporate kindness and patience. And I want my communication to consistently be through my words and my action, that I understand that things are hard and that it's possible to make it through. Because I want to encourage, as a parent, as a significant adult in the life of a child, I want to highlight the importance of reapproaching, of being able to make an attempt at a struggle, learn from that attempt, and then reapproach and try something new, try it again, learn from my efforts so that I can, again, come back and perform better the next time that I'm dealing with that challenge. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So resiliency in the classroom. So we're going to start this discussion by talking about positive psychology. And one of the primary aims of positive psychology is to allow people's strengths and capabilities to shine through their weaknesses and vulnerabilities. Okay. And so this is a purposeful stance that we take to choose to focus on what are the strengths and capabilities of individuals as they are approaching tasks, as they're approaching challenges. And as we are doing that, what kind of environment do we need in order to be able to successfully incorporate that highlighting of strengths and capabilities? So first and foremost, I have to have a safe, stable, and secure physical environment. And we acknowledge, the classroom today looks very different than the classroom a year ago. And also, not all classrooms are equal. And so sometimes just having a safe, stable, and secure physical environment for a child who lives in the reality of an abusive family and they're being homeschooled, their classroom may not have this basic characteristic. Or for a child who's attending school in an inner city, may also, even in an in-classroom setting, may not have the basics of safe, stable, and secure physical environment. But that's the first thing, kind of a first foundation that we would want to pay attention to. And then a psychologically safe place, a place that's going to be free from ridicule and from negative evaluation, Again, not of a negative evaluation of work, but personalizing that negative evaluation of the child. Something that's supportive of relationships in a tight-knit community, a sense of belonging and identification, positive social norms, and opportunities for skill building, decision-making and planning. And this is, I see this as kind of the critical piece here. And when we're looking at how do we build resiliency into a classroom, creating opportunities for skill building, decision-making, that's that critical thinking, creativity, and planning. How do I look into a situation and project what are the steps I might take? What are the downfalls that I might experience? Those are all important aspects. They're so much more important than can I learn an equation and get the right answer, is can I understand the process of approaching a challenge, dissecting a strategy and developing a strategy and applying a strategy to be successful. And then social and cultural integration of the family and the community. Again, resiliency is not something that, the classroom cannot simply overcome parental failures. And the classroom can't operate independently of the family. There has to be a cooperative partnership. There has to be or I guess ideally, there's that cooperative partnership and engaging parents and educating parents on the importance and the dynamics of resiliency, and how you're building these kind of characteristics into a classroom is an important part of that. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So within the classroom, here are some very simple steps that we can take that, again, shift the focus from performance on task to the process of learning, the process within approaching those tasks. So building in these growth-focused questions. So taking time, along with giving out the grades and sharing the results of the efforts, to have dialogue around what did you learn during this task? What parts of it were difficult? What mistakes did you make? And again, normalizing mistakes, valuing that mistakes are a learning opportunity. What skills did you have to use during the activity? Okay, helping children evaluate what skill sets do they have, what resources did they draw on internally, and really seeing their own capabilities. If you had to start over again, I love this question. If you had to start over again, would you do anything differently next time? So what I'm setting them up to evaluate what did you learn through the process, and what you learned, would it change how you reapproached? And then what advice would you give students starting this task? So how would you share your learning, your experience with others? Again, a question that sets up a norm that says, you know what, it's valuable to share with others your experience so that they can be successful. The successful of the whole is, again, more important than individual, that competitive, who gets the highest grade, who's number one in the class perspective. And then the final question on here is, or statement is, being able to reflect with a child, you can't do it yet. That there's still a future, that having failed at something in the present does not mean that you are doomed, that's where you have to stop. That there's that, again, that ability to reapproach this, to learn from your experience and to build on that learning to be more successful the next time. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so kind of as we're wrapping this up, so we've talked about an awful lot of different things at a very high level. Taking a community approach and understanding that resiliency is happening, is being either fostered or inhibited on a larger scale than just the classroom. It's more than just the family. It's more than just society. It's all of these in concert. So parents and schools investing together in fostering resiliency. Schools investing in parent education, So using some of the time in parent-teacher conferences to talk about that approach, that growth-centered approach. Educating students, again, purposely building into the day those times to evaluate the process that foster and call out characteristics of resiliency, and then promoting a culture that fosters resiliency. Again, so the final slide, if anybody has any interest in looking at the study, taking an evaluation yourself, there's a little self-test you can take to kind of get a gauge on your own resiliency. You can visit cignaresilience.com. You can see the different resources we've put together around the study and our findings. But that's where we'll wrap the presentation piece of this for today. I think we have some question and answer time here. So.
Thank you so much, Tom. We're so grateful to you for sharing your expertise. Good afternoon, to all of our participants. My name is Jessica Trudeau, and I am Director of Strategic Initiatives for Text Protects. I have a few questions that will get us started, but we want to invite you to submit your questions in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. And Tom, we look forward to this conversation with you. When we were preparing, I went back and found a quote that I had recently read and spoke to me. And it's, when we learn how to become resilient, we learn how to embrace the beautifully broad spectrum of the human experience. And I think now more than ever, I can't imagine a time where resilience has been more important than in 2020. So my first question for you, the resiliency study you referenced, and really throughout your whole presentation, you're pointing to ensuring that children have a sense of belonging. For me, as a mother myself, and also as a professional in this space, could you share with us concrete ways that we can ensure that our children know that they belong?
Sure. Yeah, you're right. One of the pillars of resiliency is that sense of belonging. And how do we foster that sense of belonging? I did mention, and I think it's worth reiterating, that fostering belonging is both the actions of acknowledging what we have in common, what makes you a part of the family, what makes you part of a class, what makes you, what are the things we share and have in common, what are the goals that we have in common, but also what is it that you bring uniquely to the family or the classroom, and being sure that as we identify what makes somebody unique, also connecting that with how do we find value? How do we value those things that make somebody uniquely individual? And so, so we want to, kind of concretely, our goals, I guess we would say, are to engage them in those areas of similarity that kind of build that sense of community, and then support and encourage in those areas of uniqueness, those individual assets, and again, always with a sense of value for those differences and how those differences and that diversity brings, like you said, that full spectrum of beauty to the picture.
Thank you. As someone who has two children who are completely opposite, I really appreciate that, focusing on what makes them so unique and makes the family so rich and beautiful. So my next question is, you referenced the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, and we certainly know from that and other literature that children, particularly those who have experienced trauma, will often look at the world two ways. So either look at the world as the world is chaos, bad things can happen at any time, or go to this perspective of I am the cause of difficult experiences, and I can control it, which means that they blame themselves when further adversity occurs. As teachers, parents, or others working in this space, how can we best speak a narrative into that for children in order to get them out of the space of trying to blame themselves?
Okay. Yes. So again, this is a great question. And I think it's one that deserves quite a bit of discussion. And I want to start with saying we need to be very careful. We need to be cautious and move with care, particularly with younger children. And we have to acknowledge that to a certain degree, those narratives are a part of their protective system, particularly if they are still living in the scenario which was unsafe. Okay, and so this is part of the strategies they have built to create a sense of safety or a sense of order. And so prematurely challenging that, as much as we don't want them to internalize, I'm the cause or the world is unsafe, we need to start with a sense of value that again, that is a functional perspective to a certain degree. Now, we don't want to leave them there by any means. We don't want to stop there and say, well, you know, it's protective, so I'm just going to not attend to that. So this is where, as adults, again, and we don't get to choose who gets to be a significant adult. Usually the child chooses who gets to be the significant adult. And so the potential is that any of us at any time are being viewed, and what we're saying is significant. And for children in these situations, being able to communicate to them within the relationship that we build, what we observe, and kind of using our I statements to share the value that we see in that child, and how we interpret the situations that we share together. So again, if I'm interacting with a child, I'm in a context with a child, and they're struggling with a task, I might just reflect, you know, I really, I really see you trying your best to accomplish this, and you know what? I think your efforts are valuable. I think that learning is hard, and doing something the first time is difficult, and you are doing a great job. And you know, even if again they're not being completely successful, trying to identify those smaller successes. And again, what I'm communicating is, I don't think you are the reason that you're not being successful. I'm seeing their success within, and I'm reflecting that actively. And I think that's again, that's that positive psychology, that those efforts to let their strengths overshadow, and again, just kind of experientially let them have the experience of a meaningful adult approaching them that way, and letting that relationship challenge the narrative versus trying to sit them down and just convince them. Which again, when we go back to their developmental stages, depending on how old they are, you know, convincing them verbally may not make sense at all. But those experiential opportunities to again reflect and communicate that I view the dynamic differently, that I see you differently, I see your value differently, I see what leads to the outcome differently than simply being either the world is against you or it's your fault.
I really appreciate that response. It makes me think about the importance of modeling vulnerability, which, as you described, I think is so important for children, but perhaps equally important for all of us as adults interacting with one another right now.
Right.
We have a couple questions that have come in. The first is from an individual that is working with teenage parents and wondering what resources you're aware of, either from Cigna or other sources for resiliency in adolescence.
Okay, I want to be sure I understand. They're dealing with the parents of teenagers or teenage parents?
This is a professional that is working with teenage parents.
Okay. In resources for resiliency, there's resiliency is a very popular area these days, and rightfully so. I think we can all probably agree that generationally we're seeing less resilience in recent generations than we've probably ever seen. And again, some of that goes back to we've become a society that has quick access to solutions. We don't have to persevere to get to the solutions that we deal with. I don't honestly don't have a resource readily available to say, here is specifically for that population. I would point back to the resiliency, the Cigna Resiliency.com website. It has a variety of topics and tools, and it points you to different resources. But also, there are I'm talking about the Cigna resources. Cigna.com has a lot of public resources on a variety of topics as well, and resiliency is one of those areas as well. And along with other general wellness resources. So I would say those are two places that I can definitely point you to. But like I said, I hate to send people to the internet and say, hey, you just do an internet search. But the reality is you can simply search in your area and specify down to your area, or to a particular population, and there's great information out there.
Yes, thank you so much. And for everyone who is participating, we just put in the Cigna Resilience site that Tom was referencing into the chat function. Tom, we have another question, and I'm sure many parents, I will say myself included, struggle with this. And it's a parent who is asking how she or he can learn how to not be a helicopter parent when that's, what is most intuitive to this individual.
Yeah, that's a really hard that's a really hard thing to do. I'm the parent of an 11-year-old girl myself, and I struggle. I mean, there are times when it's like, I can step in, I can just fix this problem, and she won't have to deal with it. And I have to be intentional. I mean, I literally think in terms of, is this going to prepare her to deal with this when I'm not here? And I ask myself that question frequently when I'm getting ready to come to the rescue. And sometimes it adjusts how I come to the rescue. It doesn't say I don't come, but there might be, again, there's maybe different strategies that I employ that, again, my goal is for her to experience and to know the full extent of her capabilities. And I think that's, as all parents, we would say that, yeah, I want my child to know what they're capable of. But I have to also balance that with, well, I have to give them opportunities to exercise those capabilities. And if I'm too quick to simply remove the stress, remove the challenge, I deprive them of the opportunity to practice, to apply. So as a parent, I want to be close enough to observe how they're applying, but far enough away that I'm not interfering with them creating an outcome, because I want my child to know that they can create outcomes. Whether they're fully successful or not, they still have the ability to create them. And then I want to go in and reinforce what they did well. Again, what would they do differently next time? That I value that they made the effort, that they took a swing, and hey, let's learn from that swing. What would you do next time? Because I want my child to feel comfortable with the next time and being ready to approach versus feeling a sense of, because that's the other side of this. What we want to prevent is them failing so dramatically that they don't ever want to reapproach that scenario again, or they don't, again, they're not getting any practice with resiliency in that scenario either. So it's, how do I find that, what is that appropriate level of supervision? What's that appropriate level of freedom? Because you can't ask a child to respond like an adult if we never give them adult situations to respond to. Mm-hmm. But we definitely want to do that with the parental oversight that says, is this realistic for their capabilities? Is it realistic for their age? Is it, all of those factors that go into it.
Really appreciate that. It reminds me personally of I have an 11 and a 13-year-old, and the first time I saw my daughter really struggling with something, it just killed me. And I remember I called my mother and she said, yes, you are going to want to protect her, but this is also a part of her life journey. And don't forget that you are who you are from learning from your mistakes, from growing through pain, from growing through suffering. And I still struggle, but I go back to remembering that conversation. Want to continue to invite anyone who has a question. We have 6 to 8 minutes left to enter it into the Q&A. And Tom, I'll keep going while we wait for questions. And that what we were just discussing really brings us to that concept of the growth mindset, and how to encourage children to know that they're always learning and growing and their brains are always developing. Just out of curiosity, how have you employed the growth mindset in working with your child, and what are some recommendations that you would have for either teachers or parents?
Okay, so this, again, this is something that without practice doesn't come naturally. So I'll start there. So we're all being transparent. This is a skill, okay, and it's something that we have to practice and be purposeful about. We started kind of as we're building the foundation of resiliency, we talk about that identity and the power of thoughts and perceptions. And, starting off, as I'm interacting with my daughter, I am, again, very purposeful about reflecting to her, the way you see things don't tell you everything there is. It tells you what you can see. It tells you what you're experiencing, but that doesn't mean that's the whole. There's many times more. And so encouraging the exercise of how can I expand my perspective? How can I, my point of view, how can I see more of this picture? And sometimes that's me pointing things out and saying, hey, did you know that that there was another way to approach this? Did you know that there were other resources to help you? Or did you know that you could, there's a different strategy to accomplish your goal? And it's a conversation. And, that the hard part, again, is not stepping in and saying, there's a better way to do it, so this is how we should do it. It's, there are other ways to do this. What do you think are some other options that we might think about? And then we brainstorm together. And then leaving the power in her hands, again, when it's appropriate. If this is an appropriate task for her to take on and fail at it herself, or to be successful at it herself, then I'd let her make the decision. And so I think that's, and then let's talk about the process. So let's not stop at, did you succeed or fail? It's, again, let's go back and talk about what are the steps you took? What are the skill sets you used? What did you learn from it? How would you do it differently? All of those things we talked about earlier. And again, I'm not perfect at this. I mean, it's, again, it comes very naturally to say, you know what? I told you that, this was not a good path to take, and see what you got, and that's, again, not helpful. She already knows that. And so again, purposefully engaging in that. Hey, what's the bigger goal here? Is the biggest goal for me to say, see, I was right, or is it, I want you to learn? And sometimes dealing with a preteen, it's, I want you to know I was right, and I fail miserably at helping her grow. But hopefully a few times I step in and apply these skills. And it's like, hey, let's encourage the safety in approaching and learning and failing and reapproaching and finding better success.
Mhm. Thank you. We have just a few minutes left and have two questions coming in, one from a grandparent and one from an aunt. And I want to point to for everyone how important community is to be able to share these ideas with one another and not feel like we're alone. You really answered these to some extent. They continue to be about if a child in their lives has a helicopter parent and they lack resiliency, how can you show up as an aunt? How can you show up as a grandmother? And what are the specific things that you can say? And I feel like everything that you said can be offered to a child no matter what your relationship is. The grandmother that I referenced asked if saying you try, indicating to the child that they tried their best and really to focus on trying. If that is, she wants to know, is that a good or bad thing, or would you say it differently?
Yeah, this is very interesting because you're right. Community is so important, and extended family plays a significant role because extended family will almost always provide more freedom to the child than the parents would. And sometimes as parents we struggle with that. It's like, grandma's not following our rules, but there's value in that because she's giving the child opportunity to expand and grow in areas that maybe I'm not ready to loosen the reins on yet. And so again, those experiences are valuable. And so I would say, that's not to say as grandparents and aunts should ignore parental guidelines for their child, for the child. But also, within those guidelines, allowing those opportunities, those expanded freedoms, those new and unique experiences, that, like I said, maybe the parents are a little tight reined on still. I think they do add value. And many times it's what prompts parents to loosen the reins. It's because the child comes back and says, guess what grandma let me do? And I was fine. I did it and it was great. And it's like, okay, so now I can expand what I feel comfortable with you having responsibility for. So I say that first of all to validate the grandmas and aunts out there that you play a significant role. I think it's always appropriate to highlight the value of trying. And again, like I said, I think pairing that with, we all try things, share your own experience. What, I try things too. And I don't always get them right. And, but I can learn from those things and sharing your experiences and sharing your perspective, again, is sometimes what broadens that perspective and that keeps that narrow view of the world from being solid. It's like, oh, there was a different way to look at this or approach it. So yeah, I think that acknowledging effort, validating effort, not replacing that with acknowledging like if it was not a passing grade, it's okay to say, what, yeah, you tried, but you still didn't live up to the standard. And so we're going to want to try differently. We're going to want to see what we can do to improve the performance at the end on certain things. So we don't want to say it's either or, it's both and. It's, yeah, you didn't make the grade, but what did you do to really apply yourself? And sometimes that's where a child will acknowledge, I really didn't try very hard. Oh, well, yeah, there is a connection there. Your level of effort and the grade, there's a connection.
Thank you, Tom. I want to be sure and respect everyone's time. I can't tell you how grateful we are to have you with us today. Thank you for sharing your expertise and even vulnerably sharing about your own parenting. And to all of our participants, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you at the next Lunch and Learn. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.